Good afternoon. My name is Eddie Maloney. I have the pleasure of introducing the panel this afternoon. But before I do that, and as you settle in with your lunches, I just wanted to take one more opportunity to thank Carrie Hessler-Radelet for her talk and Tom Banshaw for his wonderful remarks. So if you would join me on that, I appreciate that. It's truly wonderful to see Georgetown's ongoing connection to the Peace Corps and the overlap in our missions. And I'm thrilled the Doyle program is able to facilitate this conversation. I'd also like to thank the great teams at the Berkley Center and at Candles for all their work putting the event together today. It's really an amazing testament to their work to see how wonderful this is and to see all of you here. There are too many people to actually thank by name, but I did want to make one note because one of our folks is actually not here today. She had to miss the event because of a family emergency, and Jocelyn Schultz-Lewis has been a kind of driver for us in the Doyle program, and so we miss her and wish her well. So the work of all of these wonderful people in the Berkley Center and in Candles and across campus reflects on Georgetown University's goals as a global institution to be active and intentional about engaging with issues of diversity and difference on both the world stage and locally here on campus. From student activism to formal programming to community conversations like this one to important changes recently announced by President DeGioia to address issues of structural and racial injustice on campus, there are many ways that our community members are helping us all to understand our shared responsibility to and for each other. The Doyle Engaging Difference program, through the work of Candles and the Berkley Center, helps to support many of these efforts for both faculty and staff. We hope to serve not only as a resource, but also as an important means for challenging our community to continuously reflect on how our actions might best align with our Jesuit ideals of justice and community. This afternoon's panel, moderated by Professor Michelle Onona, will provide an opportunity to hear from several Georgetown students about their experiences and some of the ways in which they are engaging diversity both globally and here on the Hilltop. The structure of the panel is relatively straightforward. We'll first hear from our panelists and then allow for additional audience discussion and Q&A. So I'm just going to take a second to introduce everybody. So first, let me introduce Professor Michelle Onona, who will be moderating this afternoon's panel, a professor in Women and Gender Studies in the Women and Gender Studies program. Professor Onona is a former Doyle faculty fellow and a current fellow at the Center for New Designs in Learning and Scholarship, Candles. She also serves as the new diversity requirement coordinator in the Office of the Provost. Her research is at the intersection of feminist postcolonial, critical race, and queer theory. And in addition to her research and teaching, Professor Onona has worked in the nonprofit sector on support and advocacy initiatives for queer youth. Next, we have Jasmine Yosef, a first-year student in the School of Foreign Service. Jasmine is majoring in international politics and plans to earn a certificate in justice and peace studies. She currently serves as a senator in the Georgetown University Student Association, where she chairs the Racial and Cultural Inclusivity Policy team. Jasmine also serves as a facilitator for Leaders in Education About Diversity, which provides workshops and facilitated dialogues to extracurricular organizations on campus. And she has also recently joined the university's new working group in response to racial injustice as the undergraduate representative. So thank you, Jasmine. Our next panelist, Joy Robertson, is a senior in the School of Foreign Service. Joy is in the class of 2016, majoring in regional and comparative studies with a focus on economic and human development in West Africa. Joy spent her fall 2014 semester in Lyon, France, participating in the Doyle program as part of the Junior Year Abroad Network. In France, she studied African history, culture, and politics, and also wrote an award-winning blog on her experiences, reflection, and observations. So thank you for joining us. And finally, Caitlin Snell is a senior in the Georgetown College. Caitlin served as a research fellow for the Education and Social Justice program through the Berkley Center and the Center for Social Justice. Through her work, Caitlin conducted interviews with members of First Nation communities in Ontario, Canada, discussing the intersections of learning and culture and engaging with local schools and communities. Caitlin also serves as a member of the advisory board for student organizations for the Center for Social Justice and is a resident assistant in a freshman dorm working to create inclusive communities for students on Georgetown's campus. So please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure for me to be part of this event, and particularly exciting for me to be sharing the stage with students. So I'm going to start off by sharing a few thoughts and reflections with you about the diversity work that I do here at Georgetown University. So I began teaching in the Women's and Gender Studies program in 2013, and more recently have been able to blend my love of teaching with my love for pedagogy by assuming the role of coordinator for the Engaging Diversity requirement, which is a new requirement for Georgetown University coming into full effect in fall of 2016. So that's work that I do with the Provost's office, but also with the Doyle team at Candles in developing initiatives to support faculty as we look to implement this new requirement. So what I want to start with is just by sharing some reflections on what for me really constitutes the significance of thinking of teaching and learning and pedagogy as doing diversity work. So I'll start by saying that I love teaching, and this is why I became a teacher. And in fact, the only thing I love more than teaching is learning. So you can see that I'm in the right place for those things. And one of the reasons that I became infatuated with the power and the possibility of learning and teaching and what they can mean for us as individuals and as communities and as a planet comes really from a profound belief in the transformative potential of education. And so as I've undertaken this new role here at Georgetown in coordinating the diversity requirement, that's really been my guiding principle. There's a scholar whom some of you might know, Bell Hooks, who's written at length about the liberatory potential of education, right? What teaching and learning can really do for us as a world. And her contention, which I'm going to share with you all now, is that the classroom really represents the most vital and most radical space of transformation in the academy. So, I mean, if we think about that, right, most of us here in this room have been or are directly connected to that very space, which for me underscores the potential and the power of thinking about how we learn and how we teach, in addition to what we learn and what we teach, as being sites of really profound transformation when we think of harnessing the power of diversity. So I wanted to sort of set the stage to kind of invite us all into this conversation to see all of us as potential stakeholders in thinking about how we put this work into practice at Georgetown. So I'm going to turn to our panelists now, and I'm going to ask each of them to talk a little bit about the personal significance of the work that they've done as students at Georgetown. So Jasmine, we can start with you.
So I am only a first year. I don't have as much experience under my belt as I'm sure the rest of the panel does. But I kind of jumped right into diversity work at Georgetown. I started a pre-orientation program that's coordinated by the CMEA, the Center for Multicultural Equity and Access. I didn't really know what I was getting into, but it was a week-long leadership training program centered around social justice and diversity work. And so before I had even started classes, I was already getting involved with that stuff. And then I ended up joining various clubs and talking to various people who were also interested in these initiatives. And I think that's where I really found a passion for diversity education specifically. So I became a facilitator for Leaders in Education About Diversity, which does a lot of work on campus. We've recently started our annual allyship series, so we host several workshops on how members of significantly advantaged communities can be better allies to disadvantaged communities, so communities of color, women, queer communities, et cetera. We just had a workshop yesterday. And we also engage in diversity workshops and trainings for lots of student organizations on campus. We'll have different sororities and fraternities, or even the Corps and the credit union and different theater groups reach out to us to help within those clubs just like form stronger communities and closer ties with one another. I am also a senator in GUSA, the Student Association, in which I oversee the policy teams on socioeconomic inclusivity, racial and cultural inclusivity, undocumented student inclusion, and LGBTQ student inclusion as well. And so those are the avenues in which I primarily think I focus my work on diversity on campus, in addition to the new working group that the university's administration has started as part of their response to racial injustice in the Georgetown community and the greater community at large.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having me here. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Doyle program and specifically Melody for inviting me on this panel. I was really surprised, actually. And I want to thank Professor Onona and Jasmine for their reflections just now, because it gave me some clarity on really like what I'm here to talk about. Well, more clarity in articulating what I want to say. I think that I can really devise my Georgetown experience up into 3 parts. So before study abroad, I think I really engaged in a lot of exploration of diversity for myself and of others on this campus. Coming to Georgetown, it's a transition to college life, to this specific culture, and then to all the stresses and the challenges and the celebrations that come with it. So I think my years before study abroad, I was really trying to figure out myself, trying to figure out my peers, and also trying to figure out how I could bridge my personal life and my academic life in a way that made it meaningful. I had the opportunity to study abroad in Lyon, France, with Leah, who's sitting in the front. And it was a transformative experience in the sense that I had to confront all of my intersectional identities in a way that was challenging and also very, it was new and it was refreshing and it was liberating almost. Being an African-American woman in a very nationalist France, being an American speaker in France, being a Protestant in a French Catholic country, being middle class, living with a very upper class, beautiful, kind, loving woman. I had to confront all these identities and engage with them in a meaningful way. Being abroad helped me understand more of my purpose back here on Georgetown's campus. And I think coming into this 3rd stage, being back on campus, I have been able to have the opportunity to engage with social justice and diversity in more upfront and more tangible ways. So I have the pleasure of being a coordinator for DC Reads. This August, or this September, myself and our new director, Carrie Finnegan, have formed the Diversity and Inclusiveness Committee. It's never been formed before, and we've done some really great work. I'm really proud of us as a committee. We have surveyed our DC Reads tutors on perceptions of diversity in our organization. That was really eye-opening and enlightening to see, and as well, we've used those survey results to create a workshop that was implemented before spring break, in which we engaged our tutors in discussions about identity and how do we start a conversation about race and about identity and ability and sexual orientation, and how all of that affects the tutees that we work with who are in Ward 7 who need the best of ourselves in order to improve their literacy skills. I also had the pleasure of being the vice president for NAACP here on campus. And we, alongside our Black Leadership Forum and our Latino Leadership Forum and our friends in the Muslim community and our friends in the LGBT community have spearheaded a lot of campaigns this past year, changing the names to Remembrance and Freedom Hall. Also, the diversity requirement has been a decades-long venture that has finally come to fruition. The African American Studies major, that's been also a hard-fought battle. So being a part of all of that as a leader in the Black community, and also getting to be a member of the Queen House, which is a Magis Row house. We focus on uplifting women of color through spirituality, social justice, and self-care, and getting to engage in conversations about worth and perseverance and health for women of color in a really informal and really natural way has also been a fantastic experience. So, yeah, Georgetown's been great.
Thank you. Caitlin?
Well, unfortunately, I have to be at the end of the table and follow these amazing women with their remarks, but I'm going to do my best. And again, I want to thank Candles and the Berkley Center, especially Melody, for inviting me to be here today. It's been wonderful to hear everyone's thoughts and reflections, and as a graduating senior in May, having my last month be here and then thinking about all of these things and having such an encompassing experience, it's been a wonderful moment, even just right now, and then I hope to hear more of everyone's reflections as well. So I went to Ontario, Canada last summer, so summer of 2015, and was about 4 hours outside of Toronto in a small town of Espanola, Canada, and did research with Native First Nation communities, looking at the intersection of culture and learning. So just for a little bit of background, the area and other parts of Canada in the 1800s and 1900s experienced a system of boarding schools where students in First Nation communities were forced through a kind of aggressive civilization strategy to learn mainstream Canadian culture, but were not allowed to engage in Native culture in any sense. And so I conducted interviews looking at the way that schools and community partners and spiritual institutions and criminal justice programs are infusing and reinvigorating a sense of First Nation culture in all of these types of learning institutions. So why are they having a powwow as part of their classroom, learning of history? And why are criminal justice youth programs building medicine pouches and learning about these specific form medicines and these spiritual teachings? What are all of these aspects adding to this learning experience in whatever situation that is? And how is that influencing the student's experience? How is that influencing the way that the student not only views themselves, but views other people? So really focusing on the way that these organizations and these learning institutions infused culture in such a seamless method that they weren't even noticing it. And so being able to go there and recognize that this is different from, say, Mass in Dahlgren Chapel, because they have a smudge and they're using specific medicines and burning what we would refer to as incense, but it has a more spiritual connection to it. What all of that does for those individuals taking part in those experiences. But it definitely made me recognize the way that culture is so seamless in our experience and how we engage with other people's cultures. So I had one interviewer who is a school teacher of the Native Ojibwe language, and I asked her what culture meant to her, and she struggled to articulate her answer and was confused why I even asked it to her, because she said that culture is what we breathe. Culture is how we live, culture is how we talk to each other, culture is how we interact. And so she was taken aback by how I could ever ask her to define it, because it's just how people view each other and how we engage in our daily lives. So that was something that I had never really considered, was the way that culture is different than something we actively shape or something we actively create, but it's just the way that we live. And so how do we engage with other people's cultures, and how do we learn from each other if it's something that is so seamless? By taking that step back and really integrating ourselves into those experiences and really making sure that we are putting ourselves in the position of the learner and really listening to what everyone else is engaging in was an experience that I'll never forget and has really influenced the other work that I do on this campus. So I'm also a resident assistant in a freshman dorm. I've lived in VCW, if you know what dorm that is. I'll have lived in the same dorm all 4 years of college, which has been wonderful because I've gotten to be a freshman every single year. And learned more about the university, but also recognized the amazing place where we get to engage with so many different cultures and so many different people. And so really thinking about the way that we interact with one another, creating those not just safe spaces, but brave spaces where we're putting ourselves in vulnerable positions to share all of those minor idiosyncrasies and thoughts that don't really come to mind unless we're in those vulnerable spaces, unless we're put in those places where we're out of our comfort zone and really engaging with difference. And so that's one way that I have really been able to focus on inclusion and recognize what difference means on this campus. Also with my work through the Center for Social Justice on the advisory board for student organizations, we're always making sure that any group, any student group is able to focus on bringing it back to the university campus. So if we're talking about global medical brigades who's going to Honduras to work in health clinics, we want to make sure that they're bringing it back to this campus and ensure that any event that they throw, they're focusing on how to integrate what they have learned and what they've engaged in to the larger university community. So really had a wonderful experience, very encompassing experience, able to engage difference in a lot of different ways at Georgetown.
Thank you. So before we move to Q&A, I just wanted to ask for your very brief remarks on the theme, in fact, of today's event, which is how we bridge the local and global spheres when we're doing diversity work. So I wonder if you wanted to share, again, very briefly, so we can pull in our audience members, but what has it meant for you in practical terms, being a Georgetown student, being part of what is a very local community, in some ways perhaps even insular community, and thinking about how that shapes your connections to the world more broadly. Also, we've talked a lot about local and global as spheres. Nationally, there have been a growing number of conversations and demands for change on university campuses. Does that sphere of the national come into how you would shape or describe your experiences?
Yeah, I think the local, the national, and the global aspects of most of the work that I've done so far on campus, it's really like inextricably tied to one another. So, for example, when there were student protests at the University of Missouri earlier in the fall semester, that inevitably sparked change across college campuses, even here. And so that was when the Black Leadership Forum started sit-ins and a real movement to get the names of Melody Hall changed in McSherry Hall. And at the same time, within my role in GESA, I, along with other senators, helped draft legislation in which we just expressed as the student body of Georgetown that we were standing in solidarity with students at Mizzou and students at Yale and Stanford and Princeton. And additionally, we drafted legislation in which we as a student body supported changing the names of the buildings to whatever reflected the interests of the Black community at Georgetown. And also in LEAD, again, this tying of national diversity work with what happens here in our community. And in DC, we hosted the Night of 1,000 Conversations. It was held in the same building. We had students from DC Reads and other groups within the CSJ come in. So these were underrepresented students from the community. And they weren't literally there, but we had webcammed with people who were on the ground in Ferguson and Baltimore and Mike Brown Sr. These people who had witnessed the things that have been going on in our country for the past few years, and we brought that back to conversations on our campus and conversations with the children that these kinds of stories are tied to their lives within the local community, and so just keeping it brief, yeah.
Thank you.
Also in the vein of keeping it brief, small anecdote. I experienced the non-indictment of Darren Wilson while I was abroad in France, and it was a very moving experience, having to watch friends, family, community members that I know and love experience such a earth-shattering loss and a miscarriage of justice from such a remote place was really tough for me. But on the flip side, experiencing the same kinds of injustices, and especially the continuation of police brutality against unarmed men and women of color here in America while I'm here, has been a very interesting exercise in contemplation. So I have to engage myself in how was my response when I was in France to these similar actions different to how I'm experiencing and reacting to it here, and at the same time engaging difference, but at the same time both of these experiences or incarnations of these experiences has allowed me to reflect upon similarities. So when I was abroad, all of my French friends and compatriots could resonate with injustice. It's not a hard concept to really understand, whether you are a part of that community or not. And being in this community, being back within the community that I call my own, and trying to understand how we are similar and how we are different in the face of really tough questions and injustice and really cultural exchange has been a really great and challenging and renewing experience for me. So I guess to sum it all up, it's been hard and easy to see similarities and differences in everything that we do. Yeah.
I had a similar experience in Canada. Anytime I was interviewing someone and they were talking about educating the whole child as a motivation for including diversity and cultural teachings in the classroom, I was like, that's part of the spirit of Georgetown. Oh my gosh, that's exactly the same. But the way that and the method in which they went about it was very different. And so recognizing those similar motivations or similar values or similar visions, but the method and the way in which they went about it was definitely very eye-opening and helped it kind of bring the experience home and make it more personal, but also connect it to other people who I talked to about it on campus or building those relationships or connections. And so I think what's really important, continuing with this idea of finding similarities but engaging difference, is the importance of experience. And that's not to say that I can completely relate my experience to yours. We can find similar threads. That doesn't mean that they're exactly the same or that I can completely understand what you might be going through. But to find those similarities and to have a shared experience shows that these major issues that kind of plague our society, these social ills, social forces, whether it's here, whether it's abroad, can be expressed through these shared human experiences, and that they're human issues and issues of difference across the board and not just for one population or another, and that these are different challenges that people may be facing, but that we can all relate to them, and that they're problems for everyone that need to be addressed and not just for certain people to consider.
Thank you. So I want to open up the conversation and ask our audience members to contribute questions that they might have. So again, we have folks with microphones who can come to you if you raise your hand.
Hi, my name is Remy Cipriano. I'm a Doyle Fellow this semester, and I have a question on you talking about engaging difference. And I think, at least for America, we have a history of engaging difference in terms of globally. We're not so good at exporting our beliefs equally. We have a kind of stigma of enforcing our beliefs on people. And how do we, in this kind of sense, with the Berkley Center and Candle's work, how can we export those beliefs as equals to these communities globally instead of how we have the stigma of doing it? Thank you.
So if I understand your question correctly, you mean how do we export our...
Engage difference how do we like foster those relationships as equals, as we're exporting our values to them, but we're also taking in their values in terms of just us kind of invading them and telling them what to do? How to engage their diversity, how to set up programs.
Yes, thanks. I think I understand. I'll ask you first. There seems to be some answers brewing.
Sure. I'm happy to take that first just because I thought of another experience in Canada. I tried to set up as many contacts for interviews before I left, but then people found out that I wasn't native or that I was from Georgetown and were very hesitant to meet with me. I would drive 2 hours to meet with a principal. Yeah, of course, come on by tomorrow. Would show up and they would say, no, we can't do this. And I would express that I'm here to learn, I'm here to engage, and to really take in whatever you have to offer, and they were not having that whatsoever. So there were some instances where people just did not want any type of interaction with me, and maybe that was something on my part that I wasn't clear in what I was doing, but I found that when I built some relationships with certain people who were open to it and were very, very thoughtful and considerate and able to take that chance and make themselves vulnerable the same way I had, they would refer me to those other individuals and say, oh, well, you originally talked to this person and said, no, I'm vouching for her. She's here for a good purpose. She's here to help learn and explain and to share cross-culturally. So I think that this is obviously like a very naive answer, but just generally speaking, to engage with those who are willing to engage with us, I guess, because there are people in the world who are very hesitant to do so because of that history that you mentioned. But building the relationships with those who we can and continuing to foster them as much as possible so that we can all eventually engage in that difference, I guess, is the most that I could say from my own experience.
And I'll just add a little bit to that. I mean, I think part of something that even I continue to struggle with is the fact of being part of the academy, which itself is an institution that's really been imbricated in these really unequal dynamics of power, especially vis-a-vis marginalized communities who oftentimes are among the most heavily researched and who in many instances never see the findings or certainly reap the benefits of the kinds of research that are done in their midst. And so, I mean, again, you know, this comes back to my firmly held belief that the way in which we teach questions of diversity really comes down to, for example, even how we're teaching research methodologies in our classrooms when it comes to questions of international development, but even ethnographic research. And so research design and method, all of these different elements have to be infused with the same kinds of ethics of being curious in the world and aware of one's position, right? I mean, the academy can be and is an exciting place of transformation, but it is also a site of privilege to varying degrees for different members within it, but it also holds that power, which is something that we have to manage as well.
Hi, Tom Banshaw. First of all, thank you for all your amazing contributions to the Georgetown community. It's incredible, the work that you're doing outside the classroom, inside the classroom. And that's sort of my question to you, because Michelle raised this prospect, this vision, this ideal of the classroom as a place of transformation. And you came back to it in your remarks just now. And Jasmine, Joy, and Caitlin focused a little more on the co-curricular, the engagement within the wider community. So I wonder if the three of you could reflect a little bit on what we can do better in the classroom around these very important agendas. Thank you.
I think that, and Caitlin mentioned it, it's important to have not only safe space, but brave space if you want to have any sense of transformation. I'll speak to my personal experience. I'm a student in the SFS. In my class of 2016, we've counted many times, there's less than 10 African American students. And my major, RCST, and I'm studying African studies, I'm consistently the only African American in my classes. It's a reality that I knew coming into Georgetown. It wasn't a surprise to me. But it's hard for me to see the classroom in those classes, African studies classes specifically, engaging in topics of political economy and international development and even anthropology and social sciences. It's hard for me to completely be myself or completely engage in the material, engage in discussion, or engage with my professor if no one else in the classroom understands my experience, or no one else in the classroom really is reaching outside of themselves to see where my opinions and where my formulations of thought and theory are coming from. So I think I don't have an answer, but I would say that demographics of the classroom and classroom norms are definitely something that are lacking, in my opinion.
I think, yeah, I would totally agree in terms of demographics, especially within smaller discussion groups, and just the way different people of different identities, the way they show up within those classes, and who's taking up space, who's talking, and about what, and for how long. Those things are always something I think I'm really aware of within classrooms. And I'd also like to say a lot of it comes down to the curriculum. I am a South Asian woman, and I find it interesting that the only classes about South Asia that I could have signed up for last semester or fall semester were only offered on Georgetown's Qatar campus. And also, given that there are over 600 official South Asian languages and Georgetown doesn't offer a single one, it's a bit interesting because I think in that if those kinds of courses were offered, that would be a place for me to engage with certain parts of my identity more within the academic setting, to see more faculty that look like me or understand my experiences, and also to engage with other students of my background rather than just in specific extracurricular organizations in which I would focus in that avenue.
And I guess I would just follow up on that with a quick comment. So if any of you have been in my classes, you might have heard this before, and so I might sound like a broken record. But I firmly believe that theory saves lives. And this is maybe a radical kind of argument to make, but it's my contention. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that for so many of us who make our way through elementary and high school and arrive at university, it can be so deeply transformative to encounter an idea that positions our experiences and worldview as valuable. And that can be a profoundly life-changing moment, right? So in a lot of ways, my approach to teaching now is informed by my experiences of having been that student, probably in most classes, if not all, the only, queer Moroccan woman, struggling to try and find a text that spoke to me or gave voice to something that felt familiar.
Hi there. So the question that I have kind of relates to this idea of the classroom being a transformative space, but also going back to the idea of the classroom, like many of the spaces that we create on campus are deeply hierarchical. There is a professor, and then there are students. And that can be said of lots of spaces. The workplace, there's frequently a boss or a supervisor, and there are people who report to that boss. And the person who is at the top of the hierarchy has a disproportionate amount of power in terms of creating a safe space or a brave space. I love the term brave space. I'd never heard that before. And what people who are not at the top of the pyramid can do proactively to try to create those safe spaces or brave spaces, even if you don't necessarily have the buy-in of the person at the top. Or how do you get the buy-in from the person at the top if it's just not something that's on their radar?
Well, I have, some thoughts, but I'll ask the students if they have anything to share on that first, or if you want to sort of let it percolate a little.
You can go ahead.
Okay. one of the things that one encounters if one is doing a lot of research on diversity in higher education is that there is an overwhelming emphasis on avoiding conflict in the classroom. So there's a striking similarity in terms of the kind of language that's used as a rationale for things like diversity initiatives and training and pedagogies that would function to avoid conflict in the classroom. And what's really interesting is that when I reflect on my own experiences as a student, right, sometimes those moments of conflict in the classroom were in fact the most meaningful, right? And they become the most meaningful. And I think what's really lacking for us as faculty, I'm hitting the mic, sorry, as faculty as well as students is a discussion on what to do with the conflict rather than avoiding it. Concrete tools on how one addresses those instances when they arise in the classroom space. And I'll tell you, as a faculty member, right, that we're as much in need of support and learning around that issue as students are. I'll turn it over to the students.
I think it's a bit difficult to take on that task, although it is something I wish are more capable of doing. I think, you know, outside of classroom settings, it's easier for me to point out and call out things that I hear and or just observe that I find like that I take issue with, whereas in a classroom, not to put all of the burden on a professor, but sometimes there is that sense that, oh, well, I'm a student and I need to contribute positively and again, avoid conflict. And so I don't know, it's like what you were saying, there's a lot of merit to it. I think that's something that individuals would have to work on. It's definitely something I would aspire to be able to do. Again, I'm also just a freshman. So.
You're not just a freshman. I would definitely agree with you. I've had the experience of engaging in teaching with elementary school students, both as a tutor and as an actual teacher, which is very hard. But I would agree in the fact that there's definitely a hierarchy, and traditional pedagogy states that teacher is at the front, students are sitting quietly in the back, and everything, as you said, Professor Onona, everything is about maintaining order and making sure everything is nicety and pleasant. I think that, to Jasmine's point as well, there's definitely an individual impetus that has to happen on the part of students that calls on them to be, I guess for lack of a better word, brave, to call out ignorance and also question each other in a very scholarly way. You know, Socratic seminar is great because you get to sit around, well, you get to sit as equals and you get to question each other respectfully and engage in thoughtful debate. At the same time, there's such a thing as social justice fatigue. So activists have to expend all of their energy teaching others and fighting the good fight, and they don't really have a chance to care for themselves in that way. So at the same time, I think it's really, it's not fair to always ask students, especially students of underrepresented identities, to come out of themselves and to call everyone out or to call for change and reform. I think that those who are in the majority or those of privileged status should also take the impetus upon themselves to call for change and to call for reform.
Yeah, I just completely want to reiterate that and share my experience. I've also had professors who weren't necessarily aware that there was contention in the classroom or that students felt differently than the professor or wanted to have a more integrative dialogue experience. And I think that there is a tendency to make topics palatable and to make them very straightforward and to not really engage multiple stories of the same issue. But I think Georgetown is unique in this sense, and even universities in general are very open to change in most instances, or at least open to talking about them. And so I don't know how many instances where I've been in a class been frustrated with the way that a professor taught something, had coffee with 4 or 5 of my classmates and chatted about it, and took it back to our professor and said, hey, we're not okay with what was talked about, or we want to talk about this aspect of the issue, and they were open to changing that. So I think even just being clear and cognizant of the way that we might all glaze over issues and may not be fully engaged with them, or may not be aware of that, and still being open and vulnerable to dialoguing with each other and creating those spaces and workshopping them as we go, I think is really important as well.
Well, I think that's a wonderful place to end. Also, because what you've kind of illustrated in sharing that experience with us is that the classroom is a transformative space not only for students, but for professors in many instances, right, as it should be. So I want to thank you all for participating in this panel and sharing your reflections with us.
I'm Michael Kessler, the Managing Director of the Berkley Center and a professor in the Government Department. And it's my pleasure to wrap the day's activities up. I encourage you to go to the websites of the Doyle program itself, and also Candles and the Berkley Center, who have robust web presences for the Doyle program. The Doyle program is many things, including today's Doyle Symposium, which is a forum that we hold annually to discuss ways that faculty and students can come together on campus to learn about and advance engaging difference among our programs, among curriculum, and among opportunities like this. It's also programs and for faculty support, like the Doyle Fellows program that Candles runs, like the Doyle Seminar program that the Berkley Center runs. But probably most importantly, it is the kinds of impacts that it has on students, both in and outside of the classroom, that I think is the real centerpiece. Opportunities for Georgetown to be our better selves in the Jesuit tradition, and in the liberal arts tradition, and in the tradition of a global leading university. And I think that the next generation of students, the students that are here are the next generation of leaders who will be the next Carrie Hessler-Radelet, who will be the next leaders of NGOs, of corporations. And encouraging students like Jasmine, Joy, and Caitlin, as well as every other student, is precisely what we hope to do with this program. The founder of the program, Bill Doyle, who is currently the chair of the board, has spoken a number of times at the symposium and in other contexts about his discouraging view of a trend that he saw in over 30 years of business, that some people that he encountered were less open over those years to engaging with people who were different from themselves. And that his hope with this program was that the next generation of students at Georgetown would have opportunities to learn those skills and learn how to be open and empathetic and build understanding through dialogue. And so today's panel, I think, gives us great optimism that we have amazing students here and programs that are going to help bring that about. So finally, I want to give some thanks to a few people. First and foremost, to our keynote speaker, Carrie Hessler-Radelet, Director of the Peace Corps, and Lauren Maman, who is the faith-based advisor with Peace Corps, and also for Provost Bob Groves, who was able to come for the first part and open, and two of the most important people for the Doyle program are Vice President Tom Banshoff and Vice Provost Randy Bass, who were the main drivers of the Doyle program and saw the opportunities, had the vision, and executed that over the last 7 to 10 years, as Tom said. So we thank you. And then finally, and in some ways as important, are the two teams at Candles and at Berkeley. Executive Director of Candles, Eddie Maloney, and Maggie DeBalius, Jocelyn Schultz Lewis, James Olson, Laura Dunn, and Michelle are all part of that team in various capacities. And at the Berkley Center, besides Tom and myself, it's Melody Fox-Ahmed, who is our main lead on this, Aaron Taylor, our Director of Communications, and Carly Henry, who helped manage all the logistics today as our events coordinator. So with that, thank you very much. Enjoy the afternoon. Thank you.